So, Grey Zone Warfare launched today, and today we'll be having a look at its performance on PC running on the RTX 47T Super, and that is paired with a 14600KF CPU, and that again is paired with DDR5 6400 megatransfers per second CL32 memory. Right, so we're at 1080p on the Epic preset, and I'm playing from South Africa. Unfortunately, there aren't any South African servers, so there's a lot of rubber banding. I have to choose a server in Europe, and so far it's not great. I mean, I thought the game crashed there, but okay. So 1080p Epic preset here, and let's start our benchmark run. I actually wanted to start the benchmark run earlier so that we could capture that big stutter, but this game does not run very well at all. Right, it's definitely not a bad looking game, but just a little bit that I've played so far, its performance is horrendous. Sure, I know it's early access, but that should not be an excuse, right? You pay money to play a game, and for it to run like this, I mean, we're not using DLSS here at all, but to be able to just maintain or just above 60 frames per second with the 4070 Super at 1080p, that's just not on. Right, as I said, the game doesn't look too terrible. The foliage, everything, like the jungle, it looks very good. There are some visual artifacting here and there. It does look weird at times, and this rubber banding is just atrocious. Like this is the worst rubber banding I've seen in a competitive online shooter. Not competitive, but an online shooter. And I mean, some games I actually have to play on EU servers, and none of them play like this. Alright, so that's 1080p for you. Just have a look at our VRAM usage there. We are sitting at 8.5 gigabytes of VRAM used. So if you've got an 8 gigabyte VRAM GPU, these settings aren't going to work for you. Alright, so let's just go ahead and change the settings here. So first, I just want to see what kind of scaling we do get if we just drop down to high. We were sitting in the mid 70s, remember, so let's just go ahead and do that. So now we are sitting in the mid 80s, and our VRAM usage is still sitting at 8.2 gigabytes. It creeps up quite quickly, actually. 8.3 gigabytes more or less now, and allocated is sitting at 10 gig, but the stuttering is horrible, and just tie that in with the rubber banding. It's a very terrible experience, at least for me. I'm not sure if this is the experience most of you are having. If I look at the Steam reviews, maybe not the rubber banding so much, but I have seen some complaints about rubber banding as well, so I don't think I'm alone in that. Alright, as I said, it is early access, so maybe they'll fix it. I highly hope that they do, but the issue with that is that, you know, early access is supposed to give you an idea what the game is like, and for the developers to get some money if they want to continue development, etc., give you an idea how the game plays. But when games launch like this, even in early access, I do think that it hurts them more in the long run. That's just my opinion. I do think that that happens, but getting an average here of 82 frames per second, 1% lows are sitting at 53, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 30, so definitely not ideal. So let's just drop this down to the medium preset, and then we'll start playing with some resolution scaling. Okay, so just going to drop this to medium, and the nice thing about it is you can actually see the changes being made. But now just I did not actually see that the resolution scale changes with the preset, right? So let's just do this quickly one time. Just want to see what the frame rate's like. So 77. Okay, we really did not gain that much then, technically, going from ultra or epic to high, because the resolution changed. So I'm going to keep the resolution set to 100, because I do think it is it's not ideal to use the game's built-in resolution scale. So let's drop this down to medium, and resolution scale to 100, and now we are sitting in the mid 80s, right? And the game does look a lot worse than it does on high. You can just see the foliage. I mean, it's difficult to see because we are rubber banding so much. I mean, it might just be my connection. I've got a 320 megabits per second fiber connection, but due to my location, as I said, I'm about 6,000 miles away from the closest connection, and it shows. Right, so the medium preset seems to have slightly less stuttering. I know there's not a lot of action on the screen here. I'm just running around to give you a bit of an idea what the performance is like. I'm going to try and keep it a little bit shorter than my previous videos, as I do think it's best just to wait for a few patches before diving into this game. Right, but our performance here was actually better, but our VRAM usage is sitting at still sitting at 8 gigabytes. So once again, if you've got an 8 gigabyte GPU 1080p medium, it's going to give you some issues, it seems, unless this game is like many of the newer games we've seen lately, where it just uses the available VRAM as much as it can. It does creep down a little bit. We're sitting at 7.9 gigabytes of VRAM used, but the stuttering is still, it's very consistent, right? So the performance is inconsistent with consistent stuttering. All right, so is that an enemy? Nope. So, right, let's just go back to the high preset. I don't think we should be playing on the epic preset here. I'm going to the high preset and then just enable DLSS. It also supports FSR and frame generation for both DLSS and FSR. Okay, so we're on high. I'm just going to make the 3D resolution 100 and then we'll enable DLSS here quickly. So we've got TSR, DLSS, FSR and XeSS, right? So we'll just use DLSS, and we're not going to use frame generation just yet, just DLSS set to quality with reflex low latency enabled. Okay, so go ahead and apply that, and all right, so we were sitting in the mid 70s, now we're sitting in the mid 90s, but once again, I'm not a big fan of using upscaling at 1080p. It's especially on a GPU like this, right? A 4070 Super, you should not be needing DLSS at 1080p. So definitely some improvements need to be made here. Even with DLSS, we're sitting with 8.6 gigabytes of VRAM used. That's terrible. Like, the map is huge, and there are definitely a lot of assets and a lot of foliage as well, but like, VRAM management can definitely use some work. We're going to run out of VRAM here at 1440p. I can just see that coming. Just look at the inconsistent experience, or inconsistent frame time graph there as we move into a newer area. That's just horrendous. I'm just going to be playing in this specific area where I've been testing so far. Okay, so I'm just going to enable frame generation, leave this in the exact same settings, DLSS quality with frame generation, and see how it goes. So I don't know what auto means, okay, but we're just going to leave it on. I hope auto does not mean dynamic, because that'll just be a terrible experience. And we are getting 150 frames per second here, which is much better than 80. And the game actually does feel quite good. We're not seeing a lot of, or I'm not noticing a lot of input latency here. Let's see. I know you probably won't be able to see that in the top right hand corner there, but latency is sitting at around 40 milliseconds, right? It does show me the frame rate in the top right hand corner as well, but it does not show me the lows. But you can see the latency is sitting at around 40, but the stuttering is still there. Frame generation does help when you are CPU bound, but never have we been CPU bound during this run, not from what I could have seen anyway. All right, so that's going to conclude our testing for 1080p. Let's move on to 1440p. Okay, so we're at 1440p on the Epic preset, no DLSS, no frame generation, and make sure of that. Sure, so no frame generation, just TSR, and let's start our frame rate count here, and 50 frames per second. Impressive. I mean, the game does look quite good now at 1440p, a lot sharper than at 1080p, and like, the texture quality looks pretty good, and I mean, that's pretty much what I can say. Yeah. The game looks quite okay, and the performance not so much. Sitting at 9.6 gigabytes of VRAM used, yeah, and I was expecting a little bit more, seeing that we were almost running out of VRAM at 1080p, and now all of a sudden we're not having any rubber banding, or not that much anyway. But not being able to hit 60 frames per second, yeah, sure, it's the Epic preset. Not a big believer in running everything at ultra or epic. That's you can definitely adjust your settings to get a high frame rate. I'm just here to test some presets. So let's drop this down to the high preset and see if we can at least maintain 60 frames per second here. Alright, so just on the high preset, but once again I'm increasing the render resolution here. If we want to have a lower internal resolution, we'll use DLSS. Thank you very much. And there's not a big difference between epic and high. It's literally the biggest gain you get from in performance is actually from the lower internal render resolution, which is, it's kind of silly. I mean, what else does change from going from ultra to high or epic to high? And now the rubber banding is back again. It's so annoying. I won't be playing this game. I'm just testing it. Hopefully I get my video done within 2 hours and I can just refund it. But still not maintaining 60 frames per second. We didn't even hit 60 frames per second, so not a good start. Let's drop this down to medium with 100% render resolution, and then we'll start playing with DLSS. Alright, so medium puts it at 71% render resolution, which is almost DLSS quality, FSR quality type of resolution, slightly higher. But anyway, medium preset, here we go. And for the first time we are seeing 60 frames per second. It might not maintain 60 frames per second, or I mean, I highly doubt it'll maintain 60 frames per second. But even at native render resolutions, look at the shimmering there of the thatch roof. Is it a thatch roof? It might be a corrugated roof. It's not ideal. The game definitely, okay, the rubber banding gets annoying. The game definitely needs a lot of work. And it's a shame because this game was very hyped. I saw a lot of hype for it online, and this is typically what happens, right? The games get overhyped and under-deliver on the promises, or at least performance, and then you get mostly negative reviews on whichever platform it becomes available. Like, it does look good, I'm not going to deny that, but it does not look 60 frames per second at 1440p medium good, okay? And not on a 4070 Super anyway. Not that it's the highest end GPU out there, but it's no slouch either. Alright, so that's it for our medium testing. I'm going to use Epic here because there's no difference in the frame rate between high and Epic. So we'll use Epic with DLSS set to quality and see what happens. Alright, so we're on the Epic preset here, and we'll just enable DLSS here on quality and no frame generation. Once again, let's just see what kind of gains we are getting at. Remember, we were sitting at around 54 frames per second, and now we're sitting at 72. Like, this is definitely possible for a game like this. I mean, not the performance, but 60 frames per second. I know it's a shooter, but it does seem to be a slightly slower paced shooter, and it does seem to have very little input latency. Actually, it feels very responsive. I've kept the numbers in the top right hand corner up there for you to have a look at the latency anyway. I know it's very small. I haven't really played around with the parameters of the on-screen display for that, but you can see that the latency fluctuates quite a lot as well. Like, it goes into the low 30s and then it goes into the mid 40s, and that is noticeable, and that's also corresponds to the fluctuations in the frame time graph. All right, so I probably wouldn't mind playing like this, although I personally would want a bit of a higher frame rate. So let's just have a look what happens once we enable frame generation. Just look at the latency as well, 34, 35 milliseconds in this specific scene. So let's enable frame generation and see how it affects all that. All right, so the exact same settings, just with frame generation now enabled. And let's go ahead and do that. So now we are sitting with 110 frames per second, give or take, and our latency did increase by around 10 milliseconds, depending, like as I said, it was around 30, in the mid 30s, so now it's in the mid 40s. So definitely not terrible. It creeps up to the low 50s as well, although it does feel okay. The game does support NVIDIA Reflex as well. I mean, obviously, because that's one prerequisite of DLSS 3 frame generation. So it does mitigate the input latency penalty somewhat, but still 110 frames per second. It's definitely playable, and I wouldn't mind playing like this. It's just that I was expecting a little bit more. But let's see if we just drop down the quality settings a bit. I'm not going to test on the high preset. I'm just going to drop this down to the medium preset with DLSS quality and frame generation enabled, and see what kind of frame rates we get. Okay, so on the medium preset, let's just make sure that all these are still on. So we've got DLSS set to quality and frame generation enabled. Let's go ahead and apply that, and didn't gain much. We gained 10 15 frames per second. Latency is still in the mid 40s, so no advantages whatsoever playing on the medium preset as opposed to the the epic preset. So preset scaling is not so good. I mean, I'd expect it to be a lot, or to scale a lot better than what it did. Well, I discovered a convenience store. How convenient. I'd expect it to scale a lot better than it does, because, I mean, there's a lot to scale down, or to be able to scale down, but unfortunately we're not seeing that. Alright, so I think that's it for 1440p. Let's move on to 4K and see if we actually run out of VRAM. Alright, we're now at 4K on the Epic preset. No DLSS, no frame generation. And let's see how this goes. I think well, we're sitting at around 10 gigabytes of VRAM used. I'm not expecting this to play well at all. I just wanted to see how far we can actually push the VRAM usage. And not even seeing 30 frames per second. The game looks very good at 4K. I record on a 4K monitor connected to a second PC, and it does look very, very good at 4K. Like the texture detail, everything looks great. And we actually saw 30 frames per second there. Impressive. Alright, let's just drop this down to medium, and then we'll play around with DLSS until we get at least 60 frames per second. Right, so on medium, just with 100% render resolution or 3D resolution, and we gained not much. Okay, so we gained around 10 frames per second. Okay, all right, so I just minimized that. I'm just going to leave that open while I enable DLSS here, so that we can see what kind of performance gains we actually get in real time. So let's just enable DLSS on quality here. So going to 54 frames per second, balanced 60. Although it probably won't maintain 60. No, it won't. So let's go to DLSS performance and go ahead and apply the settings here. Now we are sitting at 66 frames per second. Now I actually did record this specific section, and unfortunately DLSS 3 frame generation was set to auto, and that means it's on. So re-recording this specific section and getting, I mean, this is not terrible for 4K. I mean, it's 1080p internal resolution, so in that sense it's terrible. But if you drive a 4K monitor, then I mean, you can definitely use these settings. And with DLSS frame generation enabled at DLSS quality on the medium preset, I actually got around 75 frames per second as well. So frame generation does definitely help quite a bit in this game. Not like other games where I've seen this. Do I have stamina? Apparently I've got stamina. So not like other games I've seen at 4K, frame generation on the more mid-range GPUs don't really help that much, especially on the normal 4070 and 4060, for example. Enabling frame generation at 4K yields almost no frame rate gains. Can't say performance gains because it's not performance. Anyway, so got a pretty decent frame rate here. I mean, decent relatively speaking. And average of 68 frames per second. Our 1% lows are sitting at 41, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at a terrible 22. 2. Right, so I'm just going to use these exact same settings, enable DLSS frame generation, and then I'm going to ask for a refund. Okay, so just DLSS performance still, and enable frame generation. We went from, we didn't gain that much, but let's reset our numbers. Our input latency, or our end-to-end latency, increased quite a bit. We're sitting at 58 milliseconds of latency there, and maybe without frame generation it would probably be better to play, especially if you are playing at DLSS performance with the GPU. I mean, we are seeing it hit the 90 frames per second at times, which is not terrible considering the output is 4K. Remember, you do lose some performance with the upscaling. It's not going to perform the same as at 1080p native, even though the internal render resolution is 1080p. There's still some computational overhead by upscaling to 4K using DLSS. All right, same with the FSR. So I'm going to do one more test after this. I'm going to use these exact same settings, just enable FSR 3 frame generation, just to see if there's a difference. Usually FSR 3 frame generation has less overhead, and it does increase the frame rate a little bit more than DLSS frame generation. So standing still here, we're getting 85 frames per second. Let's see if we enable FSR performance and FSR frame generation. So we'll just go here and enable FSR, and FSR set to performance, and fidelity FX frame generation. Okay, weird naming. Well, you can actually still use NVIDIA Reflex low latency here, and is it on? Is frame generation on? Medium preset with FSR set to performance. Let's see. It seems like we actually lost quite a bit of our frame rate here. We were sitting at 85, and now we are sitting in the 60s. Like, this is pretty much what we had without frame generation, right? So let's just see if it actually does work. So let's just disable frame generation here. Do we need to restart the PC or restart the game? Let's disable FSR frame generation. Doesn't make a difference. Let's apply it again. No difference. Okay, interesting. Maybe we need to use windowed mode here. Let's go ahead and apply that. Let's see. No change either. Okay, so interesting. Maybe I need to restart. Anyway, I'm not going to. My time is running out. We are running out of time to request a refund, and I don't want to be sitting with this game in my library, not in its current state. All right, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.